So we've completed our logo, and now here comes one of the most important parts of actually finishing up this logo, and that's actually creating the style guide. And what the style guide is creating a set of visual standards that communicates a company's branding, tone, and word usage. And that's how the brand will pretty much be on different mediums, how it will be displayed, how it will respond, and all the type of actual information that you're going to be conveying to the client on how to use the work that you provide them. And it's actually very important to create the style guide first, before you start creating the client presentation and then the personal presentation for your Dribbble, Behance, or personal portfolio. Because the actual style guide is one of the most in-depth things that you can create with your logo, as opposed to a client presentation that just might show the logo and then a few mock-ups of it on t-shirts or hats or on a building perhaps or on one of those glass panes. That would usually be left for the client presentation. He doesn't need the nitty-gritty on how to use the logo because he hasn't approved it yet. You're just trying to get the very basic approvals for that client presentation. But before you actually get the approvals, you need to have 100% confidence in your actual design. And in order to do that, you need to be able to actually proof it and defend it almost. Defended that this logo is shrinkable and it will still retain its readability, that this logo has type and you can use this type in numerous types of ways, that this logo is great on different colors and these are the colors that you can use it with. And all these small aspects that define the actual logo usage and how the brand should work is going to help you actually define how this logo should be presented in the final client presentation and personal presentation. It's almost like you're exploring the other half of the logo, because you already created the logo, but you haven't defined how it's going to look with type. You haven't defined how it's going to look like on different mediums. How about a black surface or a white surface? And even how other colors are going to take a play into this. And if you want to go really in depth, you could even start creating social media layouts and really testing how this logo would look on even a Snapchat icon or a Twitter header. Because when you're doing the client presentation, you might want to include that. But in this case with the style guide, we're playing with all this information, playing with all these possibilities before we start laying it down and really creating those final Photoshop mockups. So we'll be creating an actual style guide, a fairly corporate one. I kind of want to stray away from any fancy colors or anything that really comes off as playful and really make it clean, simple, minimalistic, and corporate. And by corporate, I just mean that we're not going to be including any text or, lots of filler text that just doesn't have to be there. It's going to be to the point, fairly short, use professional fonts, not go anywhere silly, and again, just be very, very minimal. We're just trying to get across the point of what we're trying to present. Of course, we can always take the style guide and turn it into a client presentation, just by adding some more in-depth mockups and some separations for the chapters, just give it some more graphic life. We're strictly creating a style guide. And a style guide is a set of instructions and is just setting the tone, the mood, and how the brand is supposed to be presented. There is no need to be playful here, it just has to get to the point and communicated very clearly. So, before we all do that, we actually have to kind of pre-plan how it's going to work. And I already said corporate, which is great, but we're going to divide it in a few sections because we're not only going to be talking about the logo, we're going to be talking about typography as well, color, icon usage, how it's going to look on Twitter, and even clothing and merchandise. So make sure you have that laid out before you start diving into the style guide. Make sure you know where this logo is going to be used so you know what actual instructions to present for it. Because let's say that this logo is going to be used on a lot of banner ads. Then you're going to include in this logo or style guide how this logo will appear on these different ads. And if this logo is going to appear on ski passes, you're going to want to design something very basic to show how this logo would look on a ski pass. Position, margins, or even color changes. That sort of thing. So know where this logo is going to be and just kind of mock it up. Play with it. So as a style guide, we're almost presenting it like a very small book. So with any book, it's going to be divided into chapters. And these chapters are going to be divided into their own little sections, depending on what page is going to be talking about what. And of course, we're going to be starting off with the actual title of it. So we're going to call it Brand Guide. I'm just going to type out Brand Guide. And because Ski World, the actual font of this, already uses, I believe, Monster Cat? I can never say it right. Montserrat. just call it Mont for now. So we're going to do Mont, and we're going to make this bigger. So we have brand guide. Let's just do style guide. And let's make style guide semi-bold just to give some pop. And then we're going to go into character, and we're going to shrink this up. And so this is already creating an example of how our brand guide will be. We already have a very basic, almost like book cover for it. But again, with any book cover, we want to have the actual numbering of it as well. We want to have the logo always in the top right corner, and maybe even what we're talking about in that specific page on the left-hand side. So in this case, I would have introduction, the logo, and 00, page number 00. So we're going to do all that. So I'm just going to do a cool trick, and I'm just going to draw out a rectangle in this already artboard. Just going to remove this. And now we kind of want to create an inner margin where everything else is going to sit, kind of that empty space. So I'm going to go to Edit, or even Object, Path, Offset Path, preview it, and we're going to see by how far we want to actually offset this. And everything in my case is in inches, because I'm going to be creating business cards or mock-ups for it as well. So you can go into your Illustrator preferences and just switch it from pixels to inches. And I find it easier to work with in this case. So this is just going to set almost like a little border around where we're going to design. Perfecto. So now let's actually throw in all that stuff. So I'm going to take Ski World. I'm just going to move it up for now because it's just getting in the way. And I'm going to write introduction. I'm going to scale it up. Let's go back to regular. And the font that we choose here is going to stay pretty consistent on all the pages because there's no point of it switching in and out in sizes. And I like how that looks. And also make sure you're on this type of alignment for the paragraph, because if you're going to be typing out different lengths of words, you don't want it to be aligned in the center, but always start from the left hand side. The same will apply to this number over here, which will be aligned to the right hand side. So Command C, Command F, just to paste on its existing area, and 0, 0. Perfect. And now here comes the cool part. We want to make sure that Ski World is always in this top corner. But there is no point doing copying, pasting it across the entire thing, because if we want to say go back to Ski World and change the ski to be bolder, or even have a less weight attached to it, we're going to have to go to each individual logo and change that. But there has to be a better way. And if you're familiar with Photoshop, we have this very cool asset almost called Smart Objects, where you create one object and then you can duplicate it, almost like instancing it. And once the original change, all the others change with it. It's almost like a Dropbox sync, you could imagine. So we're going to do the exact same thing. So in Illustrator, that's called Symbols. So we can go to Window, open up the Symbols palette, and you won't even believe how easy this is. We're just going to click and drag this entire logo into the Symbols palette. We're going to make sure that this is a graphic, do entire logo, click OK. Now we can actually just drag this in. And boom. This logo is now a symbol, and we can reuse it as many times as we want. So I'm just going to put it right here and shrink it. So we have this pretty much done. So we have the actual header done. But now, as you can imagine, we also don't want to do this all on one artboard, because if we are going to be saving this out, we don't want to save the entire artboard, but we want to save each artboard as a separate PNG. So in order to do this, we need to have multiple artboards. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to create another rectangle. This time across the entire artboard, and not just to create that little inner margin. Whoa, didn't catch that corner. Let's go back. And that's perfect. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a few copies of this. And just like this. And just to fix the spacing, I'm going to start hitting random align buttons. Hope that we get lucky. And we created these three. Then we're going to do the exact same thing by grouping it 1, 2, 3, group, Command C, Command F, and drag it down. And drag it down again. And we're going to assume we create a fairly large artboard, or a style guide for this client. And he's going to be one happy guy when he sees this. So we're going to give ourselves enough artboards to work with. And we can again select all the artboards and align them as we wish. And that's perfect. So now we actually need to create the artboards. So on the artboard tool, we're just going to click and drag over the rectangles. And the idea behind this, automatically lock to the rectangles, so it saves us a lot of work of actually trying to figure out the precise measurements, because here we're just clicking and dragging, and it's much, much easier. And we're done. We got all of our artboards. So now I'm just going to click the black rectangle since we don't need them and delete them away. And there we go. We have the artboard set up. So in this case, I'm also going to grab these small elements. Command C, Command F, and automatic lock on. Command C, Command F, automatic draw. So we're already saving a lot of time just because we're already creating how this book is going to look. And if you look at other style guides like NASA's, and even I posted a few on LogoCore, they're all going to have this almost different visual aesthetic. And that's kind of the fun in these, is that you can really play around with how you want these to look. So don't be too restricted on how you can create this. This could be on one flat color. This doesn't even have to say brand style guide. It could just be a picture of the folks who work there with, you know, maybe the Ski World logo underneath on the left-hand corner. It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you get the message across. And as little words as possible, because it is a visual way of actually exploring the brand, so no need to write an essay in this case. Alright, so we have brand style guide. Now to actually move on to the next part. So before I even proceed here, we have the Ski World logo, but I want to separate that into 3 parts because sometimes I might just use a Ski World part, sometimes just the icon. So I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to do double click to edit. And I'm going to withdraw all of this and go back to the original. So while we're here, we actually may as well just create an artboard for these, just so they kind of look nice and clean. And then we can always go back to them and edit them. So we have that. So let's actually just drag out another artboard. Kind of predict the width for it. I think this is as close as we can get. Grab these 3, shrink them down just a bit, and drag them into the artboard. And these are going to be almost our master copies of the logo. So we have 1, 2, so we have to drag this into the symbol palette and drag this into the symbol palette. Alright, so we're pretty much set to go. So usually how I like to start off the style guides is starting off in a very linear way. So brand style guide. The next chapter should be, what is this about? So I'm just going to throw in the main logo in the center, because this is a brand style guide about this logo. Make it slightly larger, and we're good. That's how I want to keep it. So I'm just going to title this logo, and it doesn't help that I already created a duplicate here. So logo design. So this is our main mark. But what follows up with this main mark is that we actually have multiple alternatives in this case. We have the main logo, and we have the Ski World with the text. We just have Ski World, and we're also going to have a few black and white versions. You know, because this logo sometimes might appear on a yellow background or a very dark background. So we're going to play around with that as well. And in this case, it's actually called responsiveness, or that's the way I usually approach it, is how responsive is this logo going to be in different scenarios. So I'm going to title this responsive. And we're pretty much going to start utilizing these 4. So I'm going to create a mini description of what each part is. So we're going to have the lockup. We're going to have the lockup alt. We're going to have the avatar and favicon. And a favicon is that little icon you see on the top left hand side of a corner on the website browsers. So it's pretty much like a very small emoticon, almost the exact same size. So I'm gonna take these again. I'm gonna get a larger size. Oh, actually condense them and the spacing between them, but I am gonna increase the size of them. And we are on regular, and that's all good. So our full lockup in this case is going to be the entire logo. So we can just drag this in here again. And proudly say that this is our full lockup. Alright, great. So then our lockup alternative is just going to be ski world, because there will be scenarios where we can't actually fit the symbol mark, but having ski world written out as itself is much more important than the actual just text part of it. So I'm going to match ski world to the exact same size as the logo above. And we're going to throw that down as well. Alright, so we have the alternative version pretty much set. So after this, we need to create all the avatars, and that's going to be the even smaller version of the logo. And in this case, because we already have the logo defined, I usually don't see a point of just shrinking it and showing to the client that this logo works just slightly smaller. We kind of already see it by having the little watermarks on the top right hand corner. So I'm actually going to create real avatars. So in this case, we're going to have a rounded avatar. Almost like a Twitter one per se. So just one that's slightly rounded. Give it a nice gray outline. 50% gray should work. And then we're also going to throw in a circular version. Then after this one, we're going to throw in a version that's going to be a bit more colorful. And then that should be good. Then for the last one, because we don't need any more avatars, we're just going to throw in the Snapchat icon as well. Just because that's fairly important these days. And most brands are actually on Snapchat now, so it's pretty interesting to see if you can actually define a way for this logo to exist within the Snapchat space. So I'm going to select all of them, make sure it's aligned, and we are. So next part, we're going to throw in the main logo in the circle. And it works pretty well. I like how it looks in this case. We're going to do the exact same thing for the rounded rectangle, which looks, again, very nicely. And then for this one, we're actually going to use a yellow color. So we're imagining that this is going to be using a yellow color for the tint. So I'm just going to grab a temporary yellow. It might change when we actually bring in the color we're going to be using for this brand. In this case, just a yellow should work. We don't need a stroke. And I'm going to throw in the logo again. And seeing how it looks on yellow. Not bad, not bad. We might even go back and revisit it, but at this point, it's pretty safe to say that we have a good starting point. Command C, Command F, and shrink this down and align it. We're going to put this onto 50% gray as well, just because it doesn't need that much dominance. And the rest works. I'm going to make sure that it's not on white. And we're just going to drag it to the center. Perfecto. So here, we're actually again defining the responsiveness, the alternative versions, how it's going to look on avatars, even though I actually completely forgot to throw in the logo for the avatar version. So let's just do that quickly. Throw that in here. Kind of minimize it. Bring it up. And we're good. So the logo looks like this on several different avatars, alternative versions, and small favicons. And it could be even smaller. And you can already see that you're doing a client a massive service just because you'll be able to explain to him how this logo is going to work on different platforms, and even yourself a service, because if you see that you have very weak typography and it can't stand alone by itself, then you know that you have to address this problem before you start creating these very fancy mockups. And this is again very rough to play with and very dynamic. We're just throwing in logos that are already very dynamic and as it is to these very basic style sheets, and you can always reuse them once you made one for yourself. So the next part of this is actually creating the protected space, and the protected space defines how much space this logo needs around it before you can start adding other elements to it. And just a very quick example, if we have, let's say, this logo, Ski World, and someone, we don't know who, decides to put it next to the logo, they would not know what distance to keep it at. And you might say, oh, I already provide them with the vector file, they just need to copy and paste it. But you can't predict that. With a style guide, you're trying to eliminate every one of these predictions, because you can't have a singular error that might mislead the user on how to use it. Because I might come in and say, I don't like how much space there is between the logo. No one told me how much space there is supposed to be between the logo, so I'm just going to make it like this. Then, next year, a new designer comes in, and you really like space, and he's just going to put it all the way over here. And by the end of the cycle, you're going to have Ski World and the symbol logo be slightly different lengths each year. And you can imagine how a brand wouldn't like to do that. Especially larger brands. Like, you can't imagine Apple changing up their tone of gray every singular year. That doesn't happen. Once they adopt a certain design aesthetic, they tend to stick to it. And that's what style guides are made to do. They're meant to preserve that knowledge. So we had Ski World like this before. Or it doesn't even matter, because we have the main one over here. But in this case, we're going to define how much space this logo needs in between the words and how much space it needs around it. Because again, someone could put an image right below the logo without giving it that breathing room. And this is your chance to define the breathing room. So we have the Ski World here. So I'm just going to take the symbol and we're going to drag it in. Let's make it a bit smaller, just so we have something to work with. And we should be golden. So this is Ski World. Dun, da, da, da. And we probably should make it even more smaller. So we're going to be working with this, and we can always scale it up later. It's not too big of a problem. So for this protected space, the way I usually like to start out is by creating an actual outline across all the important elements. So this would be a great place to start, and give it a 50% gray fill. And then we need to define how much space there is going to be between this icon and Ski World. And because this logo is always going to be scaling up and down, right? Because again, it can be an icon size, it can be on the whole width of an entire ski. You can't exactly say 5 inches, because 5 inches isn't going to matter when it's scaled up 400%. And no one's going to be scaling up 5 inches to 210%. That's just not going to happen. So in this case, we're actually going to be using the actual logo to define itself a size, and then use that size to define the spacing. And most logos will often be very compatible with this. And here's what I mean. So we have this logo, and I'm just going to double click to edit, grab this as a copy, and go back. So we have Ski World, but we need to define the space between here and here, and we can't do for the 5 inches, but we could actually use this entire logo to define the size from here to here, just by using another copy of the logo. So we can do Command F, paste the logo in, fill it with gray. In this case, we actually just want to literally fill it with gray. Remove the stroke, flip the stroke. Ooh, such a process. And then, yeah, it already fits perfectly. And we can just scooch it all the way over here. Give it a lighter tone. I'm going to go to Pathfinder. I'm going to merge it. We're going to do Object, Path, Cleanup. And there we go. So we define that the logo starting from here to here should be around the size of this logo. But we have a bit of inconsistencies because Ski World is slightly closer than it is. So this is a good way to actually fix ski world now, just so it remains consistent in the future. So I'm going to take ski world. And perfect. It almost fits perfectly. So again, we're going to do that one more time. 1, 2, save it. And we see that our logo just touches ski world. And that perfectly defines the shape and the size of how much space that we need in between the symbol and the type mark. And because we did that live, that change already applied here. And we can see that it looks perfectly fine. And we're going to keep it just like that. And again, you don't actually always have to use the actual shape of the logo itself to define the size. You could often just take this mountain, for example, and use that to determine the size. You could be using the sun, or you could take this entire logo, cut it in half, for example, and say that the distance is half of the logo's width, just by saying that this is x, and then from here to here, that's 0.5x, or 2x, right? But you're staying very dynamic, because if you increase it, no matter what, it's going to be 3 times the size of the logo. So we're really bringing algebra back in, where you would least expect it. So that's done. So now we actually have to define the very top space of it. And for the top space, I don't think that we need a lot of, we don't need this entire height to be on top of here. But if we could actually just take this mountain height and apply it to the top and bottom, then we're pretty much in business. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take this pen tool. I'm just going to drag out, or even just draw at a point by holding shift. See where it kind of stops and finish off my line. I'm going to drag the stroke from here. So this little line is going to be determining the actual width of it. We're going to throw this into the very back of the logo because we don't really need to showcase that. We're going to drag it to the other side. I'm going to drag this point outward. I'm going to copy and paste it. And there we go. So we're determining that this height is going to determine this height. And that's really easy to work with. So Command C, Command F, drag this up. We got all the heights defined. And then we're just going to drag out a giant rectangle. We run into the same issue on the other hand side of the logo. So Command C, Command F. See how large of a space this gives us. And make sure that the line fits accordingly. And because of these green guides, it all happens pretty automatically for us. So even less stress. And that's pretty much it. The only thing that we have to do now is just label it, just so if someone else is reading this, they could understand the actual comparisons that we're making size-wise. But you can already see that we're defining a pretty good protected space. So I'm just going to call this X. X, in fact, can just be this color of a stroke. I'm just going to flip it. And it's going to be a much smaller size of a font as well. So this is X. And X is common to here, and X is common to here. And we're done. And you can already see that we're generating the client a lot of value because he's not going to have to figure this out. And the designer who he's going to hire for maybe a skateboard design or something afterwards is going to know exactly what to do. In fact, it's a pretty good instruction guide. So that's done. The next step that we can do is actually define the minimum size of this logo. And in this case, what that means is that if this logo is going to be printed, that's going to define the minimum size it can be printed. So no larger than 5 inches or 4 inches. And that's not a problem to do either. So before I do that, I'm just going to make sure that this logo part specifically is going to be defined. So in fact, this actually couldn't be an easier process in my opinion. So let's just shrink this down, and before we do that, let's just go to preferences and make sure that the scale is not gonna stroke with it, so that way it always just stays at the 2-point stroke. that's perfect. So we can actually drag this to the left-hand side. I think my scale actually did stroke. So I'm just going to select all these stray options. Make sure that we're running at a stroke of 2. That we might have actually just increased by accident. And we're good. And I'm not going to increase the font size of them, just because I'm going to see that they don't scale, just because the stroke doesn't scale either. And now we just have to create the minimum size. And that's usually the easiest thing to do. So again, throw in the ski world. And we're just going to create a small underline underneath it. I'm going to use the eyedropper tool again just to inherit the stroke effect. And bring it in all the way in. Lock it in. And now we just have to say what's the minimum. And in this case, I think 2 inches would be fine. I think that if you print this on 2 inches, that would still be visible, even though it is still pretty small. And we're just going to write that in then. 2.0. Ooh. Not sure where I started writing that in. 2.0 inches. That's for the entire mark to be printed. And even if you have other marks, so let's say we actually go back and say that we want to have this avatar printed, but we want to limit that size as well, we can define all those singular ratios here as well. But in this case, I think I'm just going to leave it as is and march on. So, the next part. So the next part is logo variations, and that's where the logo is going to start varying in its actual form and not the size, because we had the very first step where we had the responsiveness change, ski world, and different avatars, which is great. But in this case, ski world, the actual logo, I never intended it to always be presented the way it is, always on white. In fact, I always wanted to take the black silhouette around it and just use that as a main mark. And in this case, I might actually want to use that as a main mark on just a yellow background, or even a different color background, depending on how we actually start to formulate the color tones later on. But in this case, I actually want to play around with the logo on these different backgrounds and variations in size. So it's not going to be too complicated again. We're just going to create a few boxes. We're going to create 3 over here. Make sure they're evenly spaced. Shrink them down. Shrink them up. And we're just going to fill them with a light gray. So this original logo that we had, I actually have one more idea for it, and that's where this logo is going to start coming into play. So we have the ski world. I'm going to create one more variation. So I'm going to edit the symbol, copy the symbol, paste the symbol, and I'm just going to keep only the black silhouette. And that's going to be one of our main logo variations. So we have the black silhouette, the exact same process as before. We're going to drag it into our symbols palette, graphic, okay. And now the fun part is actually going to be making these different variations. So I know that the first 3 variations are just going to be on gray, like the way they're meant to be presented with a slight blue tint. So let's just choose that right now. So slight blue tint. Or even that's a bit too much of a blue tint in my opinion. So we're going to de-bluify it. And we have that. But the very last one, I actually want to try it out on a different type of background color and see how this logo is going to work. And this is again the very fun of style guides, because we're not sure if it's going to work. If we're going to have to modify the logo, or if we're going to have to define very strict restrictions in this case, which I'd rather not do because a very restrictive logo isn't always the best thing, but we're going to try it out. So I'm going to choose a yellow. So I'm going to do a FFE 912. Just going to put it over here. And we're going to call that a day. So now let's actually try just throwing on different logos on here. So we have the main colored version. That looks pretty good. I'm going to do a duplicate copy and throw in the black symbol. And then throw in another one just for the white. Select all three. Select all three, scale them down. And just arrange them into place. Now we're just, again, we have to make sure that they are aligned. We're going to group all two of them, then select the whole thing, and make sure that that group is aligned. Perfect. So in this case, we're showing that this logo looks great on white, but if we take the black variation, it also looks great on white, but then we can also present it on a different colored background, such as yellow, and it will still work. So we're presenting these logo variations to, again, defend the idea that this logo is flexible. And I actually like how it looks on yellow. I think it's very presentable, and I think it still maintains this very simplistic brand image. So we have to do the exact same thing now for the parts that we didn't define. And that's for the entire word mark. Because as much as the symbol is great, that's not how the logo is going to be always presented. So Command C, Command F. Make sure that this space is somewhere in between. And then select this yellow. And we're going to do the exact same thing just by dragging in this symbol. Showing that this as a symbol would work. But then for the other half, we want to do the exact same thing but with this black logo, but we don't exactly have an option for that, so we're going to create it. So I'm going to increase the artboard size. I'm going to double it, in fact. Going to double click, OK. Command C, Command F, delete, paste the logo. And then because we have this exact spacing already defined, we're just going to have to do the simplistic route and paste it over. And we can delete this main logo, and we're left with this. Bit larger than the bottom one, but that doesn't matter. We're going to be scaling everything down anyways. And we're going to throw it into this. Okay. So now we can go back here, grab this iteration, make sure that it's the same actual width as the one that's shown before it, just so there is no consistency issues, because that would be just terrible to show to the client. They align perfectly, and we're going to bring it over here. So we're already defending this idea for the second time that this logo looks great on different colors, especially yellow, and it works even with a word mark. And that's all the style guide is supposed to do. It's just reinforcing the idea that you can use this logo on yellow as a background. And we can even define more colors in the next part, which is going to be the color tones. And it's also great because we don't have to show this logo being on every single color. We just have to show the idea that it works on different colors. And if you use it on different colors, you have to use this type of logo and not this type of logo, right? So again, you're setting the rules and almost a playing field of how this logo is going to be used. Alright, so it's safe to say that we're pretty much ready to move on to the actual color tones. For that section, I'll actually see you in the next video just to break it up into a few parts. And we'll do color tones, start doing the typeface, and we'll actually start introducing products and actually merchandising into a style guide, which is really, really fun. Because if a logo looks great on a t-shirt, you know it's gonna look great. So, I'll see you in the next lesson.